I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and we're coming off a Monday pod in which we went 3-4 against the spread, but we're still kicking at 22-15 overall in the play-in/playoffs. Combine that with a 34-19-1 record overall for the NBA picks. Things are still rolling. Yeah, for sure. And speaking of series closers, we started most of the pods that we've done so far for the playoffs with the Celtics and Nets series. And now that is obviously over. The Celtics win the series 4-0, and they win game 4, 116-112, covering the -1 spread on the road. And it's a wrap. We've discussed it. Everything played out kind of exactly how we laid out as the games went along. And, you know, for me, it was an interesting series in the sense that, like, you watch these games and you come into the series with your opinion, and you watch the games and you adjust, much like the coaches and players adjust throughout the series. Yeah. And I mean, that took a turn, but I just, you know, as we watched it play out from like game 2, it was just like, oh, this is a problem for the Nets. And so the sort of the same way things played out, as that series wraps up for the Celtics, they will now go forward to face the Milwaukee Bucks, as you mentioned. And the Bucks win and cover. They win their series 4-1. They cover the -10 for us very easily. So a good little 2-0 wrap for us there in those two picks, but 116-100. And I mean, easy cover for the Bucks. Weird series for the Bulls as they dealt with injuries. They dealt with the one great DeMar DeRozan game and then the normal DeMar DeRozan playoff games, I'll say, as someone who followed a lot of his career. But in terms of those two series wrapping up, and now we look ahead to the Celtics and Bucks series, which will start on Sunday, Boston is favored by 5 points. I'll say this much. My angle going into this series is I'm strictly going game to game because I need to see what happens with Chris Middleton. Right. So that's kind of my angle going here. And in game 1 at home for Boston, -5 is a lot. And I don't really like laying that many points, but I'm going to take the Celtics just because I'm seeing what they've done. I'm going to trust the defense down the stretch, and the defense that they'll be able to stop Pat Connaughton, Grayson Allen, like the others, right? That have been able to do a lot of the damage for the Bucks in their earlier series against the Bulls. So I'm on Celtics -5 heading into game 1, but how does that play out in your mind in terms of not only the series, but what we just witnessed with their series wins?
Yeah. So a couple of different things. I mean, one, I understand the pricing and the series price -175 for the Celtics. Like, that all makes sense. They've got the home court advantage in a series that by and large, I think is, you know, when you see the -5 for the home team, right? Like, that's not that far off from where we talk about how, you know, if these teams were dead equal, we would go -3 to -3.5 on either side, whoever was the home team, right? If this was just literally two identical teams, one team's playing at home, you make them a -3, 3.5 point favorite, right? So Boston gets a little bit more credit here because of what they've done. And obviously the Chris Middleton injury. And we talked about, okay, well, what difference does Chris Middleton make? And it's, you know, he makes a difference covering a big number. He makes a difference playing a really good team. He doesn't necessarily make a difference in whether or not you beat the Bulls, right? Just needing to win outright as they did in those games 3 and 4. And so, okay, I would expect Middleton to have a point spread effect, right? Whether it's 1, 2, 3 points, something along those lines. You know, we'll talk about what, you know, different players mean to the point spread and some of these other matchups that are still going on in the first round. And so I just go, well, is Middleton being factored in enough here? Because again, if this was an even sort of series, then the Celtics would probably be about a 3.5 point favorite because the home court advantage very real for the Celtics. I would be open to listening to you tell me that they should be 4 point, you know, have a 4 point home court advantage, right? Which is sort of on the top end of home court advantage, you know, factors, if you will. And so if that's the case, then you're trying to tell me here with this -5 that the Celtics are only 1 point better right now than the Bucks. And I would have a hard time believing that. Right. And so whether it's, you know, 3.5 or 4 for home court or 1.5 for Middleton being out, or just even if Middleton was in, there's a decent chance that the Celtics are better than the Bucks right now anyway. right? And so the Celtics, the impressive thing is, right, like being not afraid of the Nets and being able to sort of, play at the end there to get that second seed now gets them the home court. And this was the gamble that they made, right? They made the gamble, okay, we'll play the Nets instead of the Bulls, and we won't throw these games down the stretch, even though there were points where maybe we thought they might be. I think a very specific game in Milwaukee in that last week where they had a couple of their guys sitting out. And so, we'll dig into the matchup. And I think you're probably right as far as playing these on a game-to-game basis, because, minus 175, I'm not saying it's high necessarily, but it's not something I'm dying to lay against a team, literally the defending champions here. So I'm not going to play this in any sort of series type of way. I think you're right about playing it game to game. I certainly have no problem with Boston -5. Now, the total a little bit interesting here as well. Now, we just had this Brooklyn and Boston series that I would have liked to see have gone longer, because we would have gotten more chances to be profitable by betting the under. Now, the under actually went 2-2 in those games. And so, I feel like the first time, first game it went over, and it was sort of like a lot of fouls, especially early on, right? And the referees kind of carried that over. And then the next two games were under, and then the fourth game was over, I believe. And so, I kind of felt like that should have been 3-1 to the under, but it was 2-2. And if they had played a 7-game series, as we all, put the paperwork in after game one to sign up for 7 games, if that had been a 7-game series, we might have had a 5-2, or at the, I think the very least a 4-3 record to the under. So I look at the total here and it's 218. And I go, okay, what difference are we going to have here from Boston? Because Boston is the pace setter, right? They are the defense that's going to hold this down. And so the under becomes interesting to me again, especially on the road for Milwaukee. Now at home for Milwaukee, little bit of a different story, right? The shooting's going to be a little bit better. That's just kind of how it works. We always talk about the other guys, right? The supporting cast. Your guy, Charles Barkley, might call them the bus riders, right? The guys at the back of the bus who chip in from time to time. Those guys are going to be more effective on home court. And so -5, I like. Kind of like the under here at 218, right? This is something that, again, I could see being just over 200 in a total score type of a situation here. So that's where I'm looking at it. Obviously, Milwaukee, I joked about it on Twitter and on this podcast after the Bulls won game 2, where our -2.5, right? Needing the Bucks to win 4-1 or in a sweep was very much in doubt when you're losing home games, right? But that's the Bucks. They sort of take it easy in the first 2 games, right? They did it against the Celtics last year. And so, and in previous years to that. So I go, okay, like if I know I'm not going to get peak Milwaukee in the first game, and I don't know if there's anything other than peak Celtics right now. Now, and they need that, right? Because listen, going into this season, people weren't exactly like trampling over themselves to bet on the Celtics. You and I had this conversation back in February after they'd gone on this run. And I was like, this is actually a really interesting team. And so now we're starting to really respect what the Celtics do. But a lot of that is because they're bringing their A game 100% of the time, or very near it, right? And so I expect that more than I would necessarily Milwaukee, who tends to sort of pack it in some of these early games in series. So I'm right there with you. I'm happy we've cashed our Milwaukee. We ended up we basically ended up drinking the juice in that Brooklyn Boston series, going 2-2 on those unders. And I personally had Brooklyn in game 3, but we did have the Celtics in game 4. So we end up splitting all of those bets. So we end up down 0.3, 0.4 units in that series, but made up for it in the Milwaukee series, being able to score those 2 early Bulls +10s, and then avoiding the games the rest of the way in that series and cashing with the -2.5, even though it was a bit of a sweat. So we end up 3 units on that. So we're, 2.5 on these from an accounting standpoint, we're in the pluses for those 2 series. So again, now that we're looking forward to this, I'm not looking to grab the series price necessarily. I am going to play this game to game with you here. I'll be on the Celtics as well at -5, and at 218, I'm looking at the under here as well.
Yeah, definitely looking at the unders. I'm not an over under better, so to speak, but I watch a lot of basketball, and the prediction here is that this will be that slow down, grind out, half court. Like the Celtics, I'm interested to see how it's reffed to start off as well, because the Celtics are going to try to rough up Giannis, body Giannis, and you're going to see a lot of that in this series. And I'm interested to see, because I think it'll just be that slow down half court. You're going to see games in the 90s. Like that's my viewpoint on that. So, good old playoff basketball for the old heads, I'll say. But if we go to, sorry.
Oh, sir, go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, if you can do it to Kevin Durant, right? If you can swarm him the way that they did, right? And make him make decisions that aren't just in the flow and being able to just hit shots, you can do that to Giannis, right? You're going to have the ball out of his hands, and who is going to beat you if it's not Giannis, right? They will have the plan, right? The old Nick Nurse, like put the wall up type deal for Giannis.
Yeah.
Now, again, his game has improved to the point where he, can beat that. But over the course of 7 games, that's going to be a really taxing situation for him, especially if you don't have the shooting from Chris Middleton out there.
For sure. Yeah. Having Chris Middleton turn into Grayson Allen is a bit of a difference. And I'm not slandering Grayson Allen. I know it sounds like that, but it's just the reality of the situation, right? Like the guys that they're relying on, they need to hit a lot of shots. I'd rather bet on the Celtics, at least for game 1.